Greetings to all. My name is Fartoon Abdulkadir Mohammed, GBV Coordinator at Save Somali Women and Children at Ado Center, Galmudug, Somalia. First and foremost, as we know, Somalia is a patriarchal society with firmly entrenched gender roles that often subjugate women and girls. GBV is a pervasive, particularly female genital mutilation or cutting, early marriage, and psychological abuse. Save Somali Women and Children is therefore dedicated to providing support for GBV survivors in difficult and challenging conditions. Services provided include health, legal aid, psychosocial or case management, and protection, among others. Reflecting on protection advocacy, over the past 6 years, it's clear that Save Somali Women and Children have faced significant internal challenges from the community. Save Somali Women and Children at first seemed stuck in entrenched practices. Subsequently, Save Somali Women and Children drafted a strategy whereas meetings with the community leaders, authority, and religious leaders were scheduled for awareness, raising on GBV consequences. The media, also being part and parcel, has also been of dominant by airing GBV messages and the importance of reporting GBV cases and receiving its treatment within 72 hours. This has been an achievement for the organization in receiving large numbers of survivors whom have been assisted through counseling sessions and treatment of physical injuries and sexual assault treatment. This has made the community to report any GBV cases that they may come across. And this has been Save Somali Women and Children's greatest achievement among others. Save Somali Women and Children systematically collect and analyze GBV data to identify protection work. The data then needs to be presented to donors and key policymakers to advocate for funding and resources.
Hello, dear colleagues, and welcome again. Today, I would like to share with you some follow-up elements on my first example regarding Niger and domestication of Kampala Convention. I already shared with you that in Niger, there was a protection advocacy objective regarding the domestication of Kampala Convention in terms of legal frameworks for internal displacement. Now, as there were several stakeholders involved, it's a multifaceted, multi-stakeholder advocacy objective. The type of advocacy we used were numerous. I will give you several examples. Firstly, we did sensitization campaigns and the public information campaigns such as radio messages, trainings with affected populations, with authorities, with humanitarian actors. So a lot in the public sphere. But of course, this was not sufficient. And we decided we need to have a stronger voice also that can influence this process. And in this regard, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights on IDPs came to Niger in 2018 on a country visit, which helped us a lot to advance this process. During her visit, there were public advocacy efforts, including a media conference, but also a lot of private exchanges with the government counterparts where discussion was held, including lobbying, etc. So it was through one actor, but different means and channels of advocacy. At the same time, we used the advocacy channels through direct support to the government, this including seconding a colleague to their team working on the project of the law, and as well providing them support with related research, capacity building, and other aspects. All this together led to a fact that the grounds were ready and enough advancement has been made not only on the document itself, but also on the momentum created with various stakeholders, with the affected population itself, humanitarian actors, of course, above all, the government, that the law at the end has been passed. So Niger was the first country in Africa region who effectively domesticated the Kampala Convention and has now a law on internal displacement.
I'd now like to talk about how we undertook the specific advocacy strategy in relation to this tear gas study and the different ways that we engaged with different stakeholders to try and address the issue. As UNRWA, we had a defined advocacy framework that was adopted as policy for the agency, and that set out three aspects of advocacy that we would undertake. Private advocacy directly with duty bearers to try and address their policies, laws, behaviours. Public advocacy with the media and other actors with which we wanted to gain, and mobilization, so working with other similar-minded organizations to mobilize them in order to advocate on the same issue. So the private advocacy that we engaged with was directly with the Israeli security forces that were operating in the camps where tear gas was being used, right down to the company level, but also in their battalion, brigade, and right up the hierarchical chain within the different security forces, really to, first of all, get them to acknowledge that this was a protection concern and that they had responsibility to address it. They very much said that this was certainly in no way a problematic use of tear gas. They would reference that this was having quite a benign impact, and through the report that we'd done, we very much dissuaded from that and underlined the concerns. Public advocacy, we did through the publishing of the report. We did various media stories. We had people visit the camp, write stories about it, and particularly here, the importance of having Palestine refugees present their own issues, give a voice to the concerns they have, that they are really the ones, and this is a particular element of the advocacy to really give those affected the voice to be able to address the concerns. And then mobilization with other actors that are sympathetic, particularly the donor community in the West Bank and are operating there, the different mechanisms of the Human Rights Council, the Special Rapporteur on the OPT, other NGOs, UN agencies that we took this issue to, really to amplify the message, particularly also through the humanitarian country team and through its advocacy. So it was a good example where you need private, public, and mobilization as different advocacy tactics and strategies. And I think this was one of the rare examples. I think there are not many in which you do get advocacy for protection issues really having an impact. And we did have demonstrable reduction in the incidence of use of tear gas in certain camps. So it was something that you could measure the results. We could measure the number of incidents taking place, the number of people that were arriving in our health clinics. And through this advocacy, you could actually see a difference, and certainly a number of people getting injured or even killed by this use of tear gas. So I think that's why this is an example, not only in terms of the strategy employed, but also being able to measure the results as well.
protection cluster advocacy objective for return of internally displaced person in Pakistan included ensuring that non-registered vulnerable displaced persons get access to return assistance, to lobby the government decision maker to change modality of registration process in order to facilitate the inclusion of unregistered displaced person. The target audience for advocacy were government authorities, international organizations responsible for making decision on modality for receiving assistance upon return. Type of advocacies included public, private, and indirect advocacies. The public mostly were concerned with working with the local authorities, including the government, but also traditional authority, to communicate the messages about different modality of return and entitlements. Private advocacy were mainly targeting different groups through bilateral meetings, for instance, with the military that were deciding when places were safe to return, National Commission of Human Rights, which had huge responsibility in terms of land, housing, and poverty issues, and then Provincial Disaster Management Authority that was responsible to coordinate with traditional authority. The third and last type of advocacy we used was indirect advocacy, particularly going beyond humanitarian actors and other actors such as the World Bank that were providing conditional and non-conditional cash together with the government to change the system, highlight the issue of protection concern arising as a result of registration processes, but also thinking together alternatives of making sure that the most vulnerable individuals were included. For instance, in this case, the World Bank managed to issue electronic cards that also only mentioned numbers, so people who did not have a national identity card could collect food. This model advocacy was selected to target all those different actors that need to make a decision, and so that we can come up with a more holistic way of an innovative way of allowing non-registered returnees to have access to assistance.
I wish to talk about my experience as Protection Cluster Coordinator in Libya. The point of the negotiation was not to prove one vision to be superior from the other, but to find pragmatic solutions with the parties to the conflict in ensuring the assistance and protection of civilians. For that, we had to approach the situation in different phases. First, we had to analyze the conflict environment to gather a solid understanding of the social, cultural, and political aspects of the situation, and to build a trusted relationship with the parties to the conflict to understand their position, interest, and to map the possible network for influence. Secondly, we had to understand the limits and priority of our advocacy. Understanding that limit in context, we could not only base our advocacy or negotiation on the dissuasive force of the international normative framework, but instead, we had to consider that with the fragmentation of actors involved, it was important to be humble and reconsider our relationships with communities to establish active network to influence our negotiations. Third, we had to find a common ground. To engage the negotiation process, the different parties needed to agree on some facts, even implicitly. The fact that all civilians, whatever their affiliation, were at risk and that they needed to receive the minimum vital assistance and protection. And it was important to find consent and trigger a sense of responsibility among the parties to the conflict in reducing the threat to civilians. Lastly, use an empathic approach to negotiate protection. Negotiating access or humanitarian evacuation did not require fundamentally the parties to the conflict to agree on the existence of international norms, but instead negotiation had to be conducted on multiple grounds, such as moral, cultural, or religious, that was more acceptable to the counterparts and communities affected. In this context, we worked with tribal leaders and imams as mediators to emphasize the importance of customary rules such as Islamic law, with the parties to the conflict to agree in effect, instead of agreeing about the international norms by itself.